Imagine the weight of a single piece of cloth in a world where every single thread had to be pulled and twisted by a human hand. For most of history, clothing was not just a basic necessity, but a massive investment of time and energy that stayed with a person for years or even a lifetime. We previously explored how James Hargreaves changed this entire equation by turning the traditional spinning wheel on its head and arranging spindles vertically. This breakthrough allowed one worker to produce many threads at once, effectively breaking the physical limit of what a human being could produce in a single day. It was the first time that a simple machine could do the work of 8 or 10 people, and it signaled the end of an era where human fingers were the only way to turn raw fiber into usable yarn. But the real story of the spinning jenny is not just about a clever arrangement of wood and wire. It is about the moment a technology becomes a killer app, a device so essential and so disruptive that it forces the entire world to reorganize itself around its presence. To understand why this changed everything, we have to look at the massive imbalance that existed in the world of the 1700s. At that time, the textile industry was a lopsided mess. Weavers had improved their looms and could turn yarn into fabric relatively quickly, but they were constantly waiting on the spinners. It took about 10 spinners working around the clock just to keep one weaver supplied with enough material to stay busy. This was the great bottleneck of the age. It was a wall that prevented the economy from growing and kept the cost of basic goods prohibitively high for almost everyone. The spinning jenny was the tool that finally smashed that wall. It was the killer app because it solved the most pressing economic problem of its day in a way that was accessible and immediate. Unlike later massive steam engines that required a fortune to build and a river to power, the early jenny was small and made mostly of wood. It could be tucked into the corner of a small cottage. It did not require a specialized engineer to maintain. It was a democratic piece of technology that allowed regular families to suddenly explode their productivity. This created a gold rush atmosphere in the countryside. Suddenly, the supply of yarn was catching up to the looms, and for the first time in history, the price of fabric began to tumble. This shift created a cascade of changes that no one could have predicted. When something as fundamental as clothing becomes cheaper, it changes how people think about their own lives. Before this, most people owned 2 outfits if they were lucky, one for work and one for the Sabbath. As the jenny and the machines that followed it began to flood the market with cheap, durable cotton, the very concept of a wardrobe began to emerge. People could afford to change their clothes more often, which had the side effect of improving public health and hygiene. It was a quiet revolution in the way people presented themselves to the world. However, the rapid spread of this technology also created a deep sense of unease. We often think of technology as a purely positive force, but for the people living through the 1760s and 70s, it felt like the world was spinning out of control. The jenny was so efficient that it threatened the livelihoods of those who still used the old ways. This led to the first real instances of industrial sabotage, where workers would break into homes and workshops to destroy the machines that they feared would make them obsolete. It was a clash between the old world of slow, handcrafted labor and the new world of high-speed mechanical production. This tension is something we still feel today, every time a new piece of software or a new robot enters the workplace. The spinning jenny was the first time humanity had to ask itself if the gain in efficiency was worth the loss of traditional roles. As the technology scaled, it began to move out of the cottages and into larger buildings. This was the birth of the factory system as we know it. When you have 10 or 20 of these machines in one place, you start to need a different kind of organization. You need a way to bring in raw materials in bulk and a way to ship out finished goods to distant markets. The jenny acted as the catalyst for a whole new infrastructure of roads, canals, and eventually railways. It forced people to move from the irregular, season-based life of the farm to the clock-based life of the factory. Instead of working when the sun was up or when the mood struck, people began to work according to the rhythm of the machines. This transition also brought about a need for standards. In the old days, every spinner made yarn that was slightly different in thickness or strength. This made it hard for weavers to produce consistent cloth. But with the jenny and its successors, yarn became standardized. You could buy a spool of thread and know exactly how it would behave on the loom. This predictability is the foundation of the modern industrial world. It allowed for the mass production of goods that were identical, interchangeable, and reliable. We take this for granted today when we buy a shirt or a pair of socks. But in the 1700s, this was a radical new concept. The economics of the spinning jenny also shifted the global balance of power. The massive demand for raw cotton to feed these machines created new trade routes and fueled the growth of empires. It turned small trading towns into massive industrial hubs and created a new class of wealthy entrepreneurs who built their fortunes not on land, but on the output of their machines. This was the beginning of the shift from an agricultural society to an industrial one, where the power of a nation was measured by its manufacturing capacity rather than the size of its harvest. As we look back, the spinning jenny stands as a reminder of how one specific tool can act as a lever that moves the entire world. It was the killer app that made the Industrial Revolution inevitable. It proved that human ingenuity could overcome the physical constraints of our own bodies. By multiplying the power of a single pair of hands, it set off a chain reaction that touched everything, from the clothes on our backs to the way we define a workday. It changed our relationship with time, with labor, and with each other. Today, we are surrounded by the descendants of that first vertical spindle. Every time we enter a climate-controlled factory or use a device that automates a task once done by hand, we are living in the world that the spinning jenny built. The anxiety we feel about artificial intelligence or automation is a direct echo of the fear felt by those 18th century spinners. But the story of the jenny also shows us that while technology displaces, it also creates. It created an era of abundance that was previously unimaginable. It made it possible for billions of people to have access to basic goods that were once the exclusive domain of the ultra-rich. The lesson of this era is that once the door to mechanization is opened, it can never be closed again. The efficiency of the machine is a genie that won't go back into the bottle. It forces us to adapt, to learn new skills, and to rethink what it means to be a productive member of society. The spinning jenny wasn't just a win for the people who owned the machines. It was a fundamental shift in the human story, a moment where we decided that we would no longer be limited by the speed of our own muscles. And that is how the spinning jenny and mechanized textiles set the stage for what came next. In the next episode, we will move forward in the timeline to 1796 and explore how the next great breakthrough, vaccines, changed the stakes for human life. If you want to see how these dots connect through history, subscribe for more stories behind the tech we use every day.